The world before the flood. Giants, fallen angels, and Noah's last dawn. On the last night before the rain, Noah stood beside the sealed door of the ark and listened to a sound the world had never heard before. It was not thunder yet. It was not wind. It was deeper than both, a low trembling under the earth, as if the ground itself had begun to remember the voice that had called it out of nothing. Behind him, in the darkness of the great wooden vessel, animals shifted and breathed. His sons whispered to their wives, and his wife held a lamp with both hands so the flame would not shake itself out. Outside, beyond the massive ribs of timber and pitch, a crowd gathered in the night. Some mocked, some begged, some threw stones, some called Noah a mad old man, and somewhere among them, hidden behind the noise, there were children asking their fathers why the sky felt so heavy. Noah did not answer them. The time for warning had passed. The time for building had passed. The time for laughter had passed. All that remained was the silence before judgment. The silence before mercy would come disguised as water. But the story of that night did not begin with Noah, nor with the ark, nor with the first drop of rain. It began long before there were cities to drown, long before giants walked the valleys, long before men learned to sharpen iron for war. It began when the world was young and clean, when morning light moved across the first waters like a golden hand, when the heavens opened over a garden so beautiful that even the angels were still when they looked upon it. In the beginning, the earth was not a place of blood. It was a place of breath. The rivers ran clear over stones that had never heard a curse. Trees lifted their branches toward the sky without fear of axe or flame. Beasts moved through the grass without hunger for violence, and birds flew over the garden like living songs. In the center of it all, Adam opened his eyes and took his first breath beneath the face of God. He was formed from the dust, yet he carried a glory dust could not explain. In his bones was the weight of the earth. In his soul was the echo of heaven. When Eve was brought to him, the world seemed to become complete. Adam looked at her and understood companionship before loneliness could teach him its name. She was not beneath him, not above him, but beside him, bone of his bone, life answering life. Together they walked beneath trees whose fruit bent low to them. Together they listened to the wind moving through leaves. Together they heard the voice of the Lord in the cool of the day, and there was no terror in it. His nearness was their home. The garden was not only a place, it was a harmony. Every creature knew its place in the song. The lion lay in the shade without cruelty. The lamb drank beside it without fear. Adam named the living things, not as a master naming slaves, but as a steward recognizing gifts. Eve touched flowers that had never wilted and laughed with a joy untouched by grief. There was work, but no weariness. There was command, but no oppression. There was freedom, and within that freedom one boundary stood like a holy flame. Of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they were not to eat. The boundary was not a trap. It was a door they were not meant to open by theft. It was a reminder that life was received, not seized. Love was not love if it could not choose. Trust was not trust if nothing could test it. Then came the serpent. It did not come with horns and smoke. Came with a question. That is how ruin often enters a heart. Not as a shout, but as a whisper that makes obedience look small and suspicion look wise. The serpent watched Eve with cold intelligence and spoke as though it had come only to help her think more deeply. Did God truly say that they must not eat from any tree in the garden? The question bent the command not enough to break it, but enough to make it feel heavier. Eve corrected it. They could eat from the trees, only not from the one in the midst of the garden. They must not eat it. They must not touch it, lest they die. The serpent answered with the oldest lie that ever found a human ear. You will not surely die. It said the forbidden fruit would open their eyes. It said they would become like God. It planted in Eve the thought that perhaps goodness was being kept from her. Perhaps the hand that gave everything had withheld the one thing most worth having. She looked at the fruit. It was beautiful. The more she looked, the more desire shaped itself into reason. It seemed good for food, pleasant to the eyes, able to make one wise. She reached out. When she ate, the garden did not explode. The sun did not fall. The birds did not cease their flight. Sin rarely announces itself with thunder at first. It begins with an inward tear, a thread snapping in the hidden place. She gave to Adam, who was with her, and he ate. The fruit passed from hand to hand, and innocence passed out of the world. Their eyes opened, but not into glory. They saw themselves as naked, exposed, divided from the very peace that had clothed them. Shame came upon them like a cold wind. They sewed leaves together, poor little shields against a wound no leaf could cover. Then they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. Once that sound had been delight, now it was terror. Adam and Eve hid among the trees. Imagine the sorrow of that moment. Dust hiding from the one who breathed life into it. Children hiding from the Father whose voice had made the morning. God called, "Where are you?" It was not because he did not know. It was because mercy begins by inviting the guilty to come out of hiding. Adam blamed Eve. Eve blamed the serpent. The serpent said nothing. The harmony was broken, and blame became the first language of the fallen world. Judgment came, not as blind rage, but as a truth spoken over a world now wounded. The serpent would crawl. The woman would know pain in bringing forth life. The man would wrestle bread from a resistant ground. Dust he was, and to dust he would return. Yet even in judgment there was a promise. A seed of the woman would one day crush the serpent's head, though the serpent would strike his heel. Hope was planted in the same soil where sorrow began. Adam and Eve were sent out from the garden. The way back was guarded. Behind them lay the tree of life. Before them stretched a world where thorns would grow, where sweat would fall, where graves would one day open. Eve turned back often, and perhaps in the glow of the cherubim's flaming sword, she saw the shape of what had been lost. Adam took her hand. They walked eastward, carrying within them both the memory of paradise and the poison of rebellion. Outside Eden, the first home was built beneath a sky that seemed larger and colder. Adam learned the language of the ground. He dug. He planted. He waited. He bled. Eve learned the cry of birth, the sharp pain through which new life entered a dying world. When her first son was born, she held him with trembling wonder and named him Cain, saying she had gotten a man with the help of the Lord. Perhaps she looked upon him and wondered if this child might be the promised seed, the one who would undo the serpent's work. Then came Abel, his brother, quieter in spirit, a keeper of sheep. Cain worked the soil. Abel watched the flocks. The brothers grew beneath the stories of Eden. They heard of the garden they had never seen, the tree, the serpent, the exile, and the promise. They learned that God was not far, yet not to be approached carelessly. They learned that the ground could yield grain, and that blood could speak from the altar. In time, Cain brought an offering from the fruit of the ground. Abel brought from the firstborn of his flock and from their fat portions. God regarded Abel and his offering, but not Cain and his offering. The difference cut Cain deeply. His face fell. Envy entered him, hot and silent. The Lord warned him with mercy. Sin was crouching at the door. Its desire was for him, but he must rule over it. That warning was a hand extended over the edge of a cliff. Cain could have taken it. He could have turned toward humility. He could have asked why his heart was darkening. But envy is a fire that prefers fuel to water. Cain spoke to Abel. He led him into the field, the very ground he knew best, and there he rose against his brother and killed him. No human being had yet stood beside a grave. No mother had yet washed blood from the body of her child. No father had yet looked at one son and known the other would never return. The world learned murder not from strangers, but from brothers. The Lord asked Cain, "Where is Abel your brother?" Cain answered with defiance. Was he his brother's keeper? But Abel's blood cried out from the ground. Cain, the worker of the soil, was cursed from the soil that had opened its mouth to receive his brother's blood. He would wander. He would live under the mark of his crime, protected from vengeance yet unable to escape himself. When Cain went out from the presence of the Lord, he carried civilization and violence together. He built a city and named it after his son. His descendants shaped tools, music, metal, and the first proud songs of revenge. There was beauty in their hands, but also defiance in their hearts. Harps sounded under evening skies while knives were hammered in fire. Children learned melodies, and men learned how to kill more efficiently. The world was not yet full of wickedness, but the seed had sprouted. Adam and Eve had another son, Seth, and through his line men began to call upon the name of the Lord. In those days life was long, and memory stretched across centuries. Adam lived to see generations rise. He watched children become elders while the wound of Eden remained fresh in him. When he told the story of the garden, his voice must have changed. Those who heard him might have seen in his eyes the green light of trees no longer reachable. They might have heard him pause when he spoke of the voice of God walking in the cool of the day. From Seth came Enosh. From Enosh came generations who preserved the knowledge of the Holy One. But even among the righteous, death marched. The record of those ancient lives carried a rhythm like a funeral drum. He lived, he fathered, he lived more years, and he died. Again and again, death placed its seal upon the sons of Adam. Long life did not break the curse. A man might live 900 years and still be unable to keep his breath forever. Yet one man in those generations walked with God in a way that made the earth seem less fallen when he passed through it. His name was Enoch. He lived among men who spoke of God. But Enoch walked with him. He listened. He obeyed. He saw the drift of human hearts and grieved over it. He did not belong to the violence gathering around him. The old stories say he warned his generation that judgment would come upon ungodliness, that the Lord was not blind to the arrogance of men. Then one day Enoch was not, for God took him. He disappeared from the pattern of, and he died. A sign that death did not have the final word over those who belonged wholly to the Lord. But the world did not follow Enoch. It admired holy men only from a distance, preferred strength, preferred appetite, preferred the quick reward of power. As generations multiplied, so did desire. The daughters of men were born beautiful, and their beauty shone in the valleys and cities like morning on water. Yet beauty, when seen by fallen eyes, became a thing to possess. The sons of heaven, watchers appointed to observe the earth, looked down and desired what had not been given to them. They were spirits of high rank, ancient, brilliant, terrible in knowledge. They had seen the order of heaven. They knew the boundary between the realms. But desire, once welcomed, makes even the wise foolish. They gathered upon the heights, and their leader spoke. If one fell alone, he would bear the blame alone. If all descended together, their oath would bind them. They swore upon the mountain and took wives from among the daughters of men, not by holy union, but by rebellion against the order of the Creator. They crossed a line not theirs to cross. From these unions came the Nephilim, mighty ones of old, giants whose bodies seemed made for domination. As children, they grew too quickly. As youths, they towered above men. Their hunger was immense, not only for bread and meat, but for praise, land, women, fear. At first, men admired them. Kings welcomed them into halls. Warriors bowed before them. Mothers whispered warnings to their children when giant footsteps shook the road. The watchers did not only take wives. They taught. But the knowledge they gave was not innocent. They taught men to forge weapons that could cut flesh more deeply. They taught charms and secret arts that turned trust toward manipulation. They taught the making of ornaments that fed vanity and seduction. They taught the reading of signs in the stars not to worship the Maker, but to master fate. They taught roots and potions, some for healing, many for harm. They opened doors in the human imagination that should have remained shut. Soon the earth changed. Villages became fortified towns. Towns became cities ruled by men who feared giants and hired them as protectors. Protectors became masters. Markets sold more than grain and cloth. They sold bodies, loyalty, curses, and secrets. Smiths worked day and night, red sparks flying like angry stars. Songs that once praised harvests began to praise conquerors. Children played at war before they knew the meaning of bread. The strong devoured the weak, and the weak learned to become cruel in order to survive. The Nephilim grew restless. They were too large for peace. They hunted beasts until forests emptied. They took from men until granaries failed. And when ordinary food could not satisfy them, terror spread. Stories moved from campfire to campfire of giants who ate what no creature should eat, of villages that vanished, of rivers running dark after battles between clans of the mighty. Above them all, the watchers remained proud, yet fear began to move among them. They had brought forth beings they could not control. They had given men knowledge without righteousness, power without humility, desire without restraint. The earth groaned under the weight of it. There were still righteous people in those days, but they were few like lamps in a storm. Among them was Methuselah, son of Enoch, who carried the memory of his father's walk with God. From Methuselah came Lamech, and to Lamech was born a son in a darkening age. He named him Noah, saying that this child would bring comfort from the painful labor of their hands because of the ground the Lord had cursed. Noah grew up hearing two kinds of sound. One was the sound of the world: hammers, shouting, drunken feasts, war drums, the crack of whips, the boasting of giants, the weeping of the oppressed. The other was quieter. The voice of old truth passed down through his fathers, the story of Eden, the warning of Enoch, the promise that God sees, God remembers, God judges, and God saves. Noah was not a perfect man in a perfect age. He was a faithful man in a violent age. That is a rarer thing. It is easier to be clean in a clean room. Noah kept his soul in a world that mocked the very idea of purity. He walked with God while others walked after appetite. He worked the ground. He raised sons. He loved his wife. He watched the world worsen around him and did not let its darkness become his excuse. His wife, whom many traditions call Naamah, knew the cost of his righteousness. She knew what it meant to be married to a man who could not laugh at certain jokes, could not attend certain feasts, could not pretend that cruelty was normal. She heard neighbors whisper that Noah's house was strange. She saw their sons grow under the weight of being different. She watched Shem become thoughtful and steady, Ham restless and sharp-eyed, Japheth broad-hearted and often silent. She prayed over them when storms gathered on the horizon and when no storm came at all. Noah's sons married women from among the people, women who had seen the world's corruption but had also seen something in Noah's household that felt like a doorway to light. These wives brought with them stories of lost relatives, broken villages, and the fear of giants moving through the land. Around Noah's table, many evenings passed in heavy conversation. Was there any hope for the world? Would the Lord allow wickedness to grow forever? If judgment came, who could stand? Then God spoke to Noah. The words came not as a suggestion, but as a verdict over an age. The end of all flesh had come before him, for the earth was filled with violence. God would bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh in which was the breath of life. But with Noah he would establish a covenant. Noah was to build an ark of gopher wood with rooms inside, sealed with pitch within and without. Its measurements were given. Its purpose was clear. Noah, his wife, his sons, their wives, and living creatures of every kind would be preserved. Noah did not receive the command as a symbol. He received it as work. Imagine him that first morning, standing on dry ground where no ocean could be seen, holding in his mind the dimensions of a vessel so large that it made neighbors laugh before the first tree fell. The ark was not a boat for fishing, not a palace, not a monument. It was obedience made visible. Every beam would say, "Judgment is coming." Every stroke of the axe would say, "Mercy has made a door." Noah began to build. At first people were curious. Children came to watch the old man and his sons measure the ground. Traders asked what kind of structure required so much timber. Men laughed when Noah answered plainly, "A flood? Waters over all the earth?" The sky was clear. Rivers stayed in their banks. The seasons came and went. The world had always continued, they said. Why should it end now? Noah warned them. He spoke of violence. He spoke of the grief of God. He spoke of the coming waters. He did not scream like a madman at first. He spoke as a man carrying a truth too heavy to decorate. Some listened for a moment and felt uneasy. But then the markets opened. Debts came due. Feasts were announced. Marriages arranged. Wars planned. Profits counted. Uneasiness faded. Life continued. That is often how judgment approaches. Not because there were no warnings, but because ordinary noise became louder than holy fear. Years passed. Trees fell. Beams rose. The frame of the ark became visible against the sky like the skeleton of a mountain. Noah's sons grew stronger from labor. Their hands hardened. Their wives learned to prepare stores, weave coverings, dry grain, preserve seeds. Naamah organized what others mocked. She counted jars and sacks, tended wounds, held the family together when ridicule bit too deep. There were seasons when the work felt almost ordinary. Dawn would come pale over the hills, and Noah would rise before his sons, kneel in the dust, and ask for strength to obey one more day. Then came the ringing of axes, the smell of fresh-cut wood, the sting of pitch, the taste of sweat, the groan of ropes. Birds perched on the unfinished beams as if curious about the strange mountain growing under human hands. In the evening, Naamah washed splinters from palms and listened to the men breathe like oxen after labor. Neighbors found new ways to laugh. A merchant sold little wooden toys shaped like boats and called them Noah's salvation for fools. Young men brought wine and sat near the worksite, shouting jokes about learning to swim. Women passing with baskets shook their heads and said Naamah had married sorrow itself. Children repeated their parents' mockery without understanding it. Sometimes they sang songs about the old man who feared the dry sky. Yet there were also those who came in secret. A shepherd whose flock had been stolen by giants once approached Noah at dusk and asked whether the Lord truly cared about the poor. A widow whose sons had gone to war and never returned asked if there would be room for the brokenhearted in the world to come. Noah did not promise what had not been given to him. He told them the Lord was righteous. He told them to turn from violence and seek mercy. Some wept. Some left quietly. Some returned to the very world that was killing them because repentance felt harder than despair. One night, Shem found his father sitting alone beneath the half-built ribs of the ark. The stars were bright above the beams. In the distance, a city burned orange against the horizon, though no one in the settlements spoke of it by morning. Shem sat beside him and asked, "Father, why does the Lord wait? If the earth is so full of violence, why not judge it now?" Noah looked at the stars for a long time. Because every day before judgment is also a day of mercy. We count the delay as pain because we see the wicked grow bold. Heaven counts the delay as patience because someone, somewhere, may yet turn. Do you think they will? Shem asked. Noah's face was lined with both faith and grief. I think many will laugh until the door is shut. But I also think the Lord's patience is never wasted. Even if the world refuses him, his mercy remains pure. Shem struggled most with the ridicule. He was not faithless, but he hated shame. He hated the way men looked at his family as if they were diseased. He hated the giants who strode past and laughed. Hated the wealthy who called his father a prophet of mud. Hated the young men who mocked his wife at the well. More than once, anger brought him close to violence. Japheth held him back one afternoon when a drunkard spat near Naamah and called the ark a coffin for cowards. Let me teach him respect, Shem hissed. Japheth gripped his arm. If we become what we condemn, What have we built? Ham tore away, ashamed because he knew his brother was right. Later that night, he told Noah, I do not know how to be righteous in a world that rewards teeth. Noah answered, Righteousness is not toothlessness. It is strength under command. The violent man strikes because his anger rules him. The faithful man acts when God commands and waits when God says wait. Those words did not cure Ham all at once. Nothing human changes all at once. But he remembered them when his fists tightened. He remembered them when mockery came. He remembered them when the sky finally darkened and there was no more need to defend the warning. As the ark neared completion, the world grew stranger. The giants fought more often, as if a madness had passed among them. They raided cities that had once honored them. They demanded tribute from kings who had fed their pride. The watchers, too, changed. Some withdrew to hidden places. Some appeared in dreams to rulers, promising escape from any judgment if only the rulers would bow deeper into corruption. Secret rites multiplied. Blood-stained altars not made for the Lord. People who had once been ashamed of evil began to parade it as wisdom. The old moral order did not collapse in one day. It was mocked first, then ignored, then reversed. Cruelty was called courage. Lust was called freedom. Greed was called ambition. Sorcery was called knowledge. Pride was called greatness. Men who hesitated were called weak. Women who mourned were called foolish. Children who asked why were told not to ask questions that slowed progress. Still, the ark stood higher every year. Noah sometimes walked through the market to warn people. He saw craftsmen polishing weapons of beautiful design, handles set with stones, blades bright enough to reflect a man's face before they opened his flesh. He saw women painting their eyes with powders taught by watchers, laughing while slaves carried their mirrors. He saw priests of false power selling charms against floods, droughts, enemies, barrenness, and old age. He saw a boy stealing bread and being beaten nearly to death while men nearby argued over the price of perfume. He saw a giant take a debtor by the throat and lift him from the ground as easily as a child lifts a doll. When Noah spoke of judgment, a silk merchant smiled and said, Old man, fear is bad for trade. Noah replied, So is wickedness for the soul. The merchant laughed. A soul cannot buy grain. No, Noah said, but grain cannot redeem a soul. People remembered the exchange and repeated it as a joke. Yet one apprentice who heard it could not sleep for 3 nights. Such was the hidden work of warning. Most dismissed it. Some were pierced by it. But being pierced is not the same as turning. The apprentice kept working, kept selling, kept saying he would seek God when life slowed down. Life did not slow down. It never does for those who use tomorrow as a hiding place. The ark was finished at last. It stood immense against the land, dark with pitch, its door waiting like a question. For a while nothing happened. The sky stayed blue. The rivers moved normally. Mockery became louder than ever. Men held a feast near the ark to celebrate the failure of Noah's prophecy. They roasted meat, drank wine, danced, and crowned one another with reeds shaped like boats. A giant came and leaned against the ark, making the timbers groan, then declared that if water ever came high enough to float it, he would use the vessel as a cup. Noah did not argue. He repaired the place where the giant's weight had strained the outer boards. Sometimes the faithful answer mockery best by continuing the work. Then came the command to enter. The day Noah told his family, the house fell silent. Naamah sat down slowly, her face pale, as if all the years of preparation had suddenly become real in her bones. Shem closed his eyes and whispered a prayer. Ham looked toward the settlements, jaw tight. Japheth stepped outside and wept where no one could see him. The wives held one another. They had known this day would come, yet knowing and standing inside the hour are different things. For 7 days they moved between the world and the ark. They carried final stores. They said farewell to the ground they had known. Naamah touched the doorpost of their house and remembered births, fevers, Laughter, arguments, bread baking, sons growing tall. "Will anything remain?" she asked Noah. He looked at the house, then at the ark. "What is given to God is never finally lost. But much that we know will be washed away. Do you grieve it?" "Yes," he said. "A man can obey judgment and still grieve the judged." Animals began to come in earnest. The sight became impossible to explain away. Lions came without hunting. Wolves came without scattering sheep. Birds descended in ordered waves. Serpents moved through grass and did not strike. Insects filled prepared spaces. Elephants, deer, cattle, goats, bears, and creatures whose names would later be forgotten all moved toward the ark under a summons older than fear. Noah's family worked until their bodies ached, guiding, separating, calming, arranging. The ark became a breathing world. The crowd changed. Mockery thinned, though pride tried to keep it alive. Some shouted that Noah had trained the beasts. Some said the watchers were playing tricks. Some laughed with voices that shook. Some stood at the edge of the field and said nothing at all. A mother brought her daughter close to the ark and asked Naamah if the child might stay. Naamah froze. The girl's hair was braided with blue thread. She clutched a little carved bird. Naamah looked for Noah, but Noah was helping guide a pair of restless animals. The mother's eyes pleaded. Naamah felt her heart tear. She wanted to open every room, make space where God had not commanded space, save every child, every widow, every wounded one. But the ark was not her invention. Mercy had made a door, and Mercy had also named who would enter. She knelt and kissed the child on the forehead. "Seek the Lord," she whispered. "Call on him now." The mother pulled the girl away. Anger and terror mixed on her face. Naamah carried that face into the ark and never forgot it. On the final evening, the watchers who had not yet been seized gathered in hidden fear. They sensed the heavens moving against them. Their old brilliance was corrupted, but not extinguished enough to make them ignorant. Angels loyal to the Holy One descended not with human noise, but with an authority that made the air itself bow. The rebels who had taught forbidden things discovered that there are chains beyond iron, prisons beneath the visible world, and a judgment no spell can delay. Their cries did not sound like human cries. They were the sound of ancient pride finally meeting a wall it could not climb. The Nephilim felt the loss of their fathers and went mad. Some stormed toward the ark, but confusion spread among them. Others turned on rival giants. Mountainsides shook under their battles. Trees snapped like reeds. Blood ran into rivers already swelling from the first movements of the deep. Men who had worshipped them saw at last that strength without holiness becomes a beast that devours its own house. Then Noah entered. His wife entered. Shem, Ham, Japheth and their wives entered. The animals were within. The stores were within. The tools, seeds, lamps, and memories were within. Noah turned once more toward the world outside. He saw faces he knew, some from childhood, some who had bought from him, some who had laughed, some who had once listened, some who now trembled. He wanted to speak, but no word could carry the weight of that moment. The Lord shut the door. That closing was unlike any sound heard before. It was the sound of mercy preserved and judgment released. The door sealed not with human strength, but by the will of God. Noah placed his hand against the wood. On the other side, people shouted. Someone pounded. Someone laughed too loudly. Someone screamed that the old man had trapped himself. Then silence spread. The first drop fell. It struck the dust outside the ark and made a small dark mark. Another followed. Then another. People looked up, annoyed at first, then puzzled. Rain had not fallen like this. Water came from above, steady and cold. The crowd scattered toward shelters. Laughter returned for a moment. So the old man had predicted rain. Was that all? But the rain thickened. It did not stop. It became a wall. Then the fountains of the great deep burst open. The earth split with a sound like mountains breaking their bones. Water surged from beneath, not as a river rising, but as the deep itself rebelling against the boundaries set for it. Wells exploded, valleys filled, streets became streams in moments. People ran. Animals not in the ark cried from the dark. The rain hammered roofs until they collapsed. Fires died. Markets vanished. War cries became cries for help. Inside the ark, the family held to beams as the vessel groaned. The ark lifted, not gently at first, but with a shuddering release from the earth it had rested upon for so long. With strained, animals cried. Naamah clutched a post and prayed. Shem shouted for his brothers. Ham secured a gate within. Japheth calmed a terrified horse. Noah stood in the central passage, face wet not with rain but with sweat and tears. The ark rose. Outside, the world that had seemed permanent dissolved. Fields disappeared under brown water. City walls cracked. Towers built in pride became islands, then vanished. Giants climbed hills and fought for higher ground, but the water climbed after them. Men who had trusted in weapons lifted swords against the rain and found steel useless. Mothers held children. Kings called for servants who had already fled. The watchers were gone to their chains, and the Nephilim discovered that size was no refuge from the judgment of the one who made the seas. For 40 days and 40 nights the rain fell. Time inside the ark changed. There was no sunrise seen clearly, no open field, no ordinary horizon. There was only the rhythm of work and prayer. Feed the animals. Check the stores. Strengthen the ropes. Empty what must be emptied. Comfort what could be comforted. Sleep in fragments. Wake to the groaning of wood. Listen to the rain. Always the rain. The family changed in those days. Fear stripped them of small resentments. Shem, steady and devout, learned compassion for Ham's restless questions. Ham, who often hid discomfort behind sharp words, learned that cleverness could not calm a terrified creature as well as patience. Japheth, gentle but sometimes withdrawn, learned to speak when others needed courage. Their wives became sisters in labor, sharing tasks, tears, and prayers. Naamah moved through the ark like a lamp, tired but unwavering. Noah carried the burden of knowing that outside the walls lay a world ending. Once, in the middle of the storm, Ham came to his father and asked, "Do you hear them still?" Noah did not ask who. He knew. "No," he said. Ham swallowed. "Is that better or worse?" Noah closed his eyes. Both. There were moments when the ark seemed too small for sorrow. The smell was heavy. The work never ended. The darkness pressed close. A frightened animal could injure a man. A leaking seam could create panic. A child would have been a comfort, but there were no children in Noah's family then. Only adults carrying the future in silence. They spoke often of what they would teach the children who might one day be born after the waters. Shem's wife said, "We must teach them the old world was not destroyed because it lacked wonders. It had wonders. That was part of the danger." Ham's wife answered, "And we must teach them that evil can become normal when everyone eats at its table." Japheth's wife held the olive seeds wrapped in cloth and whispered, "We must teach them to plant before they build towers." Naamah listened, then said, "We must teach them to remember tears. If they forget the tears of this judgment, they will make songs only of survival and become proud of being spared." Noah heard them and silently thanked God that the new world would begin not with warriors boasting, but with women who understood memory. After 40 days the rain ceased, but water covered everything. The ark drifted over a world without landmarks. Beneath it lay roads, homes, altars, bones, cities, and fields. The sea had become a grave and a womb. Judgment had washed the earth, but what would emerge from it? Noah did not know. He only knew God had remembered him, and to be remembered by God in a world of water is enough. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. The waters prevailed. The ark moved under winds sent by God. Slowly, Quietly, the depths began to retreat. Peaks appeared like the backs of sleeping beasts. The ark came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat. Still they waited. Waiting after judgment can be as hard as enduring it. The danger seemed past, yet the door remained closed. Noah did not break it open. The same God who had shut them in would call them out. He opened a window. A raven flew out, moving back and forth over the waters. Later, Noah sent a dove. It returned with nowhere to rest. He waited 7 days and sent it again. This time it came back in the evening with a freshly plucked olive leaf in its beak. Naamah wept when she saw it. She held the small leaf as if it were a child. Green had survived. The earth was not only a grave. Somewhere, a tree had lifted its life above the waters. Hope had leaves. Noah waited again. He sent the dove once more, and it did not return. At last the ground dried. God spoke. Go out from the ark, you and your wife, your sons and their wives, and every living creature with you, that they may be fruitful and multiply on the earth. The door opened. Light entered like a blessing. Air rushed in, carrying the scent of wet earth, clean stone, and a silence so vast that the family trembled. They stepped out slowly. Their feet touched ground that had been buried under judgment and returned by mercy. Around them, animals emerged, blinking, sniffing, stretching wings, stepping into the new world. The mountains stood under a washed sky. No city smoke rose. No war drums sounded. No giant footsteps shook the valleys. The world had become young again, but not innocent. Noah knew sin had not been drowned out of the human heart. It had ridden in the ark with them, hidden in every soul. The flood had judged the world, but the need for grace remained. Noah's first act was not to build a house. It was to build an altar. He took of the clean animals and offered burnt offerings to the Lord. Smoke rose into the clear air. It was not the smoke of destruction, but of worship. Noah bowed. His family bowed with him. They had been saved, not because the world owed them survival, but because God had shown covenant mercy. They had passed through death in a wooden vessel and come out into a world remade. The Lord received the offering. He spoke a promise over the earth. Never again would he curse the ground in the same way because of man, though the imagination of man's heart was evil from youth. Never again would he destroy every living creature as he had done. While the earth remained, seedtime and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night would not cease. Then God set a bow in the clouds. It stretched across the sky with colors no human hand could forge. Red, gold, green, blue, violet, light broken into beauty. The bow had been a weapon shape, but now it was turned upward, a sign not of war against the earth, but of covenant. Noah looked at it and understood that mercy would be remembered. His sons looked. Their wives looked. Naamah leaned against Noah and whispered, "The world has a sign now." Noah answered, "So do we." The rainbow did not erase what had happened. Beneath its colors lay the memory of cries, waters, graves, and loss. But it gave the memory a boundary. Judgment was real. So was mercy. Human evil was terrible. Divine patience was greater than men had understood. The world after the flood would not be perfect, but it would be given time. Time to plant. Time to build. Time to teach children not only how the old world died, but why faith mattered in a violent age. Time to remember that strength without righteousness becomes ruin, knowledge without humility becomes poison, and beauty without obedience becomes a doorway to destruction. Noah and his family began again. They descended from the mountain with seeds saved through the flood. They planted into soil that had known both curse and cleansing. The first shoots came up fragile, green, astonishing. They built shelters. They learned the new paths of rivers. They watched animals spread into valleys. At night they told the story, not to entertain but to remember. They told of Eden because the flood cannot be understood without the garden. They told of the serpent because lies still seek ears. They told of Cain because violence begins in the heart before it reaches the hand. They told of the watchers because forbidden desire can wear the face of wisdom. They told of the Nephilim because power without reverence devours itself. They told of the ark because obedience may look foolish for many years before it is revealed as life. They told of the dove because hope may return at evening with only one leaf, and one leaf can be enough. They told of the rainbow because God had placed mercy above the clouds. When the first child of the new world was born, the family gathered in awe. The baby cried under a sky washed clean, and everyone listened differently than people had listened before the flood. It was not merely the cry of a newborn. It was evidence that the future had opened. Naamah held the child and thought of all the children who had not entered the ark. Her joy did not cancel grief. Her grief did not destroy joy. This is the strange burden of those who survive judgment. They must learn to carry memory without refusing life. Noah blessed the child and prayed that the generations to come would not worship strength, would not hunger for forbidden wisdom, would not treat patience as permission. Shem taught the child to plant. Ham taught the child to watch the weather. Japheth taught the child to listen to birds. The women taught the child names. Names of animals, names of seeds, names of the dead, names of promises. In this way, the new world began not with forgetting, but with storytelling. Yet as years passed, Noah saw something that sobered him. The soil was new, but the human heart was old. Arguments still arose. Pride still moved in the chest. Desire still looked for doors. Fear still taught people to grasp. The flood had ended a civilization, but it had not removed the wound of Eden from Adam's children. Noah understood then that the deepest rescue would require something beyond an ark of wood. One day the promised seed would have to come. One day the serpent's head would be crushed. One day judgment and mercy would meet in a way even Noah could only glimpse. This understanding made him humble. He did not stand before his descendants as a hero who had saved the world. He stood as a witness who had been carried. When people praised him, he pointed to the Lord. When children asked if he had been afraid, he said yes. When they asked why he kept building while everyone laughed, he said obedience is sometimes the only lamp a man has before dawn. When they asked what the rain sounded like, he grew quiet. Some sounds should not be imitated lightly. Generations would pass. People would build again. They would forget again. Some would twist the story into legend. Some would laugh at the idea of a world judged by water. Some would point to mountains and seas and say all things continue as they always have. But the memory remained in the bones of humanity. Once there was a world that mistook patience for permission, and the waters came. Still, the story was not only a warning. It was an invitation. For every age has its ark, not always made of wood, but always made of obedience. There is always a door of mercy before judgment. There is always a call to leave the violence of the age, to step out of the laughter of the crowd, to enter the refuge God provides. Noah did not save himself by cleverness. He responded to a word. He built what he was told to build. He endured mockery. He prepared while others feasted. And when the rain came, the work of faith became the shelter of life. The world before the flood was full of beauty, intelligence, music, trade, architecture, and ambition. That is what makes its fall so frightening. Evil rarely destroys a world by making everything ugly at once. It mingles itself with progress. Teaches hands to make wonders while teaching hearts to love violence. It fills cities with art and streets with blood. It makes men proud of what they can build and blind to what they are becoming. It tells them that judgment is an old tale, that desire is freedom, that power is proof of worth, that no voice from heaven will interrupt the market, the feast, the war, the wedding. Then one day the sky changes. Noah's story asks a question that every generation must answer. What do we build when the world laughs at righteousness? Do we build towers to our name, or refuge according to God's word? Do we teach our children to survive by cruelty or to stand apart by faith? Do we call corruption normal because everyone does it, or do we grieve what grieves heaven? Do we wait until the first drop falls before we believe the warning? On the mountain beneath the rainbow, Noah could not bring back the drowned world. He could not undo Cain's murder, the Watcher's rebellion, the giant's violence, the city's arrogance, or the long years of mockery. But he could begin again. That too is mercy, not the power to erase the past, but the grace to walk forward under a promise. As evening fell on the first days after the flood, Noah may have stood alone beside the altar, looking across the wet earth. Perhaps he heard in memory the pounding on the ark door. Perhaps he wondered why he had been spared. Perhaps he felt the loneliness of survival. Faith does not make a man immune to sorrow. It gives him somewhere to bring it. Naamah came to him then carrying a small lamp. She stood beside him without speaking. In the distance, Shem and Japheth worked near the shelters. Ham watched the horizon. The wives prepared food. Animals called from the valley. Smoke from the altar faded upward. Above all of it, the last light of the rainbow still touched the clouds. Noah took his wife's hand. The world was quiet, but not empty. The ground was wounded, but not abandoned. The future was uncertain, but not godless. And so the last dawn of a fallen world became the first evening of a world spared by covenant. The waters that buried violence also lifted a vessel of mercy. The judgment that ended an age also carried a family into promise. And high above the mountain, where human pride could not reach and human hands could not paint, the bow of God shone across the sky, declaring to every generation that the Holy One remembers. The Judge of all the earth does right, and even after the deepest flood, hope can rise green and living from the cleansed ground. Long after Noah's footsteps faded from Ararat, long after his sons became nations, long after children who never saw the flood asked why their fathers grew silent whenever dark clouds gathered, the story remained. It remained in whispered warnings beside fires. It remained in songs about the ark. It remained in mothers telling sons not to follow Cain's anger. It remained in fathers telling daughters that beauty was holy and should never be used by the wicked as a snare. It remained in elders pointing to rainbows and saying, "Look, remember the garden, where life began in trust. Remember the serpent, whose first weapon was suspicion. Remember Adam and Eve, who hid among trees but were still called by name. Remember Abel, whose blood cried from the ground. Remember Cain, who built a city but could not build peace within himself. Remember the watchers, who crossed the boundary of heaven and taught the earth to corrupt itself. Remember the giants, whose strength could not save them from water. Remember the old man building on dry land. Remember the animals entering while the crowd laughed. Remember the door that God shut. Remember the rain. Remember the dove. Remember the altar. Remember the bow. And above all, remember that mercy is not weakness because it waits, and judgment is not cruelty because it comes. The same God who warned also provided. The same God who judged also preserved. The same God who closed the door also opened it when the waters were gone. This is why Noah's story still speaks. It is not merely an ancient disaster. It is a mirror held before every age that grows proud, every heart that calls darkness light, every society that confuses knowledge with wisdom and appetite with freedom. It tells us that the world can become loud enough to drown out conscience, yet not loud enough to silence God. It tells us that one faithful household matters. It tells us that obedience performed in obscurity can become salvation in the storm. It tells us that when everything familiar is washed away, the promise of God remains firm enough to stand on. The first rain was judgment. The rainbow was promise. Between them stood the ark, the shape of obedience, the shelter of mercy, the wooden witness that a man who walks with God can endure the laughter of a dying world and live to see a new dawn. And if the sky ever grows dark again, if the earth trembles beneath the weight of human violence, If proud voices rise to say there is no judge, no warning, no consequence, the story of Noah still answers from the mountains. Build what God commands before the storm arrives. Keep faith while the crowd laughs. Teach your children the difference between power and righteousness. Do not mistake the patience of heaven for absence. Do not wait for the first drop to seek the door of mercy. For once long ago the last night came. The old world laughed until the rain began. The deep opened. The proud sank. The ark rose. And when the waters finally withdrew, a single olive leaf returned in the mouth of a dove, telling the trembling survivors that judgment had not destroyed hope. Hope had roots. Hope had leaves. Hope had a future under the rainbow. And perhaps this is why the story does not end when the family steps onto dry ground. The danger of any rescue is that the rescued may someday forget what they were rescued from. Noah knew this. In the years that followed, whenever clouds gathered over the mountains and the younger children ran laughing through the grass, he watched their faces carefully. He did not want them to live in terror of rain, but neither did he want them to treat the sky as empty. So when the first storms of the new seasons came, he called the children close. He let them hear the rain on the roof. He let them see that water could bless the earth, fill the streams, soften the soil, and wake the seeds. Then, when the thunder rolled, he told them that even blessings must be received with reverence, because the same creation that nourishes life still belongs to the one who judges evil. One child once asked him, "Grandfather, were all the people before the flood monsters?" Noah's answer came slowly. "No. That is what makes the story painful. Many were ordinary. They married. They planted. They traded. They sang. They held babies. They buried parents. Some laughed at wickedness because they were wicked, but some laughed because they were afraid to stand apart. Some joined violence because they loved it, but some joined because everyone around them said it was the only way to survive. Do not think the old world died because every face looked cruel. It died because too many hearts stopped listening. The child grew quiet, and Noah placed a weathered hand on his head. "Guard your listening," he said. "A soul is often lost first by refusing to hear." Another time, a little girl asked Naamah whether she missed anything from the world before. Naamah looked toward the valley where new vines climbed over stones. She could have said no. She could have pretended that judgment had made every memory simple. But she was too truthful for that. She said, "I miss voices. I miss women who borrowed flour and never returned the bowl. I miss children who threw pebbles at our fence, because even troublesome children are still children. I miss a fig tree near our old house. I miss the smell of bread in a town that no longer stands." But missing something does not mean it was righteous. It only means the heart is deep, and grief can hold more than one truth. The girl asked, "Then how do we live with grief?" Naamah gathered a handful of soil and let it fall slowly through her fingers. "We plant in it," she said. So they planted. They planted grain in fields where no boundary stones remained. They planted vines and watched them cling to broken rock. They planted trees whose shade they might not live long enough to enjoy. They planted stories in children. They planted gratitude in meals. They planted caution in festivals. They planted worship before work, and when they failed, they returned to the altar. Noah often spoke of the ark as a womb of mercy. For many months they had been hidden inside darkness, carried over death, unable to steer by their own skill. They had emerged not because they were strong enough to open the door, but because God spoke and the door opened. That memory shaped his prayers. He no longer asked only for protection from storms. He asked for protection from the pride that comes after surviving storms. The sons of Noah also carried the story differently. Shem carried it like a lamp, guarding the knowledge of the Holy One with careful words. Ham carried it like a wound, sometimes tender, sometimes restless, knowing he had seen judgment and yet still felt rebellion stir in hidden corners of his heart. Japheth carried it like a wide road, dreaming of nations spread across distant lands, hoping that the memory of the flood would travel with them wherever their tents were pitched. Their wives carried it in songs, because children remember melody before they understand warning. Around evening fires, they sang of the garden, the first lie, the brother's blood, the mountain oath of the watchers, the giant's fall, the old man's hammer, the sealed door, the 40 nights, the dove, and the bow in the cloud. As years widened into generations, the ark itself weathered on the mountain. Its timbers darkened. Winds passed through cracks. Birds nested where animals had once trembled. Travelers climbed to see it and stood in silence before its size. Some touched the wood and wept. Some carved marks to prove they had been there. Some doubted even while standing beside it, because unbelief is not always defeated by evidence. Noah understood that too. The heart that refuses truth can turn even a mountain into a rumor. Yet the ark remained for a time, a dark witness against forgetfulness. It said that faith is not a feeling kept safely in the chest. Faith takes measurements. Faith cuts timber. Faith gathers food. Faith endures jokes from neighbors. Faith teaches children why they must be different. Faith keeps working when the sky gives no sign. Faith enters when God says enter. Faith waits when God says wait. Faith steps out when God says go. And the rainbow remained, not every day, not at human command, but often enough to surprise the weary. It appeared after storms, when the air was still wet and the ground smelled alive. Children shouted when they saw it. Adults grew quiet. Noah, whenever he saw it, did not only see color. He saw covenant. He saw the patience of God stretched over a world that still needed mercy. He saw judgment remembered, restrained, transformed into a sign of promise. That is the final beauty of the flood story. It does not flatter humanity, and it does not leave humanity without hope. It tells the truth about violence, pride, forbidden desire, and the corruption of gifts. It tells the truth about holy judgment. But it also tells the truth about a God who warns before he judges, who provides before the waters rise, who remembers those hidden in the storm, who sends wind over the deep, who brings the ark to rest, who gives an olive leaf before the door opens, and who paints promise across the very clouds that once terrified the earth. So listen to the rain when it falls. Listen not with fear only, and not with carelessness either. Hear in it the memory of a world washed clean and a mercy that carried life through death. Look at every rainbow as more than beauty. See it as a wound of light in the clouds, a reminder that the judge is also the covenant keeper. And when the world grows loud with the same old pride, when violence is dressed as strength, when forbidden knowledge is sold as freedom, when laughter rises around the work of obedience, remember the old man on dry land. Remember his hammer. Remember his tears. Remember his door. The flood was not the end of God's story with humanity. It was a terrible turning page. Beyond it would come nations, failures, promises, prophets, kings, exile, return, and the long road toward a greater salvation than Noah could build with wood. But on that mountain, beneath that first rainbow, one truth was already shining. Heaven had not abandoned the earth. Judgment had spoken, but mercy had the final sign.